You've probably seen the headlines, maybe caught a snippet or two about that big new trade deal between the United States and the European Union. But trust me, beneath the surface, there's a really complex tapestry of agreements, expectations, and, well, some truly unforeseen consequences already rippling through the global economy. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the 2025 U.S. EU Trade Deal. Our mission is to unpack the core agreements, explore the starkly different perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic, and then reveal the surprising economic and geopolitical ripples that are already forming. We're here to cut through the noise and give you the essential nuggets of knowledge you need to be truly well informed about this pivotal moment in global trade. All right, let's unpack this. To start, what exactly did the U.S. and the EU agree to in this landmark deal?
Well, at its heart, the EU agreed to pay a 15% tariff on most goods imported into the U.S. This covers significant categories like, cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. It's important to remember this was actually a compromise, down from the 30% tariffs the U.S. had originally threatened. So it could have been even tougher.
Right, 30% would have been huge. And what about steel and aluminum? I recall those tariffs causing quite a stir before. Did they change at all?
They remained unchanged, actually. U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum from the EU stayed at a significant 50%.
50%, wow.
Yeah, which, as you can imagine, is a major sticking point for many European industries. But on the flip side, the EU committed to purchasing an additional $750 billion in U.S. energy exports by 2028.
750 billion.
That's a huge figure, yeah.
Yeah.
Covering oil, gas, nuclear fuel, and even semiconductors are included in that energy export category.
That's a colossal energy commitment. Beyond energy, were there other significant financial components to this deal, like pledges around broader investments?
Absolutely. The EU also pledged $600 billion in new investments in the U.S. And notably, this includes substantial purchases of American military equipment. And then there's a kind of zero-for-zero tariff agreement for a specific list of strategic goods.
Zero for zero, what kind of goods?
Things like certain semiconductors, aircraft and component parts, chemicals, some agricultural products, and critical raw materials.
Okay, so zero for some, 15% for many, and 50% for others like steel and aluminum. This certainly establishes a dramatically higher baseline, doesn't it? A fundamental reset for transatlantic trade.
Oh, definitely.
Before 2025, average tariffs were much lower, hovering around, what, 1.4% to 2.5%?
That's right. So this isn't just a new chapter. It's, like you said, a completely different rule book on who pays what.
It absolutely shifts the landscape.
And it's worth noting that this deal is currently considered a framework. Some finer details are still being ironed out, in the coming weeks.
Right, a framework. Got it. Now, once this deal was announced, the reactions from across the Atlantic were, well, quite strikingly different. How did the U.S. government, particularly the White House, frame this agreement?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, it was hailed as a monumental achievement. President Trump himself called it the biggest deal ever made and a historic structural reform. It was framed as fundamentally rebalancing the economic relationship and a generational modernization of the transatlantic alliance.
That framing sounds distinctly America first, would you say? What were the actual strategic objectives the White House aimed to achieve with this?
Precisely. The stated goals were clear: bolster America's economy, strengthen manufacturing capabilities, enhance energy dominance, and improve national security. The White House projected significant new revenue. They talked about tens of billions of dollars annually from tariffs and a net $2.5 trillion over 10 years.
$2.5 trillion.
Yeah, while also aiming to reduce that long-standing trade imbalance with Europe.
Yet, the European reaction seemed much more nuanced, almost fractured. Can you break down the different camps and their core concerns?
The reception in Europe was indeed far more mixed. You had the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, for instance, voicing deep regret over the outcome. They saw it as a loud alarm bell for a more sovereign Europe.
A loud alarm bell.
Yeah, raising concerns about creating unwelcome dependencies and criticizing the U.S. for choosing, as they put it, economic coercion over cooperation and complete disregard for WTO rules.
WTO being the World Trade Organization, the global body.
Exactly. The body that aims to ensure fair international trade.
That's certainly a strong condemnation from Renew Europe. Who are some of the key European voices articulating these deep regrets?
Well, Valerie Hayer, who's the president of Renew Europe, explicitly stated that Europe has definitively entered a new era and must stand firm in defending multilateralism. She also said they need to be ready to use tools like their anti-coercion instrument.
Which is basically their way to push back economically.
Essentially, yes. It's legislative power to counter economic pressure from outside powers. And MEP Marie-Pierre Vadren emphasized that European sovereignty interests, businesses, and jobs are not negotiable. She pointed to what they saw as the deal's asymmetry.
Asymmetry how?
Well, European goods face these new tariffs, while the investment commitments flow to the U.S.
So a sense of forced submission for some, but I also heard some European leaders were more positive, or at least less negative.
That's the key nuance, right? German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, for example, welcomed the agreement. He saw it as a way to avoid an unnecessary escalation. He specifically highlighted that German car industries would see tariffs lowered from 27.5% down to the 15%.
Okay, so better than 27.5% at least.
Which he considered a benefit, relatively speaking. However, you had French Prime Minister François Bayrou starkly calling it a dark day for Europe, describing it as submission. And Wolfgang Niedermark from the Federation of German Industries, even with the lower car tariffs, deemed it an inadequate compromise.
Interesting. So even within Germany, not exactly unified praise.
No, not at all. This divergence in reactions tells us a lot. It really highlights that this isn't just an economic transaction. It's deeply political. It reflects differing strategic priorities and, frankly, national interests.
That's a crucial point. It really underscores that these aren't just dry economic figures. They're expressions of national ambition and, well, power plays. How do these political undercurrents then manifest in the actual economic ripple? So what does this all mean for the economies on both sides? Who ultimately wins and who loses when these ripples spread out?
Okay, so on the macro level, the economic impact is definitely noticeable. Leading economic forecasts suggest a measurable GDP drop for the EU.
How much?
Well, the estimates range a bit from maybe 0.2% from the Conference Board up to 0.7% according to the Kiel Institute just in the first year. Now, some models, if you imagine a full-scale symmetric tariff war, suggest potential reductions, maybe even 0.8% to 1.2%.
Okay, so not like the COVID shock, but still significant.
Exactly. It's not a catastrophic crash compared to past shocks like COVID or the energy crisis, but it's a tangible, non-negligible drag on their economic growth. It's a measurable cost of this deal.
And what about the cost to consumers, the inflation impact? Are we seeing prices go up?
In the U.S., yeah, you could see a noticeable rise in the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. That's basically the cost of everyday stuff by about 0.7% due to these tariffs. In the euro area, if the EU puts in countermeasures, that could raise their CPI inflation by maybe 0.3 to 0.5 percentage points.
And the trade deficit. The U.S. wanted to reduce that, right?
Right. The U.S. is aiming for about a $65 billion reduction in its trade deficit with the EU. That's down from the 2024 baseline, which was around $235.6 billion. And while the U.S. projects, over $300 billion annually from tariff revenue, potentially netting $2.5 trillion over 10 years.
Which could offset some GDP loss?
It could partially offset it, yes. But it's crucial to understand that these tariffs are largely borne by U.S. consumers and businesses, not really the foreign exporters paying them directly.
So it hits the average person's wallet.
Exactly. The average U.S. household is projected to face a cost increase of around $2,300 per year. That's mainly due to price hikes from what economists call substitution effects companies shifting costs.
$2,300 a year. That's significant for households. Looking at specific sectors, where are the clear gains and losses from this new economic landscape?
Okay, for the U.S., the energy sector sees a major boost. You've got that $750 billion in exports, potentially 85,000 new jobs, maybe even lower consumer energy prices eventually. The defense sector also benefits significantly. We're talking over $100 billion in procurement, maybe 42,000 jobs.
And the zero tariff sectors?
Right. Semiconductor and aircraft sectors benefit from those zero tariffs. And U.S. farmers and manufacturers are generally expected to gain market access, though the overall job picture is complex.
So American energy and defense industries are clear winners. How does that compare to the European side? More losses there.
Europe faces more challenges, generally speaking. Their agricultural sector, for example, is projected to see a net loss of over 200,000 jobs.
Wow, 200,000 jobs.
Yeah, and paradoxically, you might see increased food prices in the U.S. because of related shifts. European exporters, particularly in sensitive sectors like wine and autos, are bracing for losses. Construction is also hit. Reduced access to EU materials could lead to maybe 85,000 job losses and increased infrastructure costs in the U.S.
And what about those industries where tariffs remained high for the EU, like steel? You mentioned 50%.
Right. Steel and aluminum industries in the EU, especially in Germany, face significant competitiveness challenges with those 50% tariffs still in place. For automotive, while German cars see tariffs reduced from 27.5% to 15%.
Which Chancellor Merz pointed to.
Exactly. But it's still considered painful for their export-oriented industry because, well, 15% is still a substantial barrier compared to the pre-deal rates, which were much lower. And logistics overall shipping stuff will see significantly increased costs for shippers, especially for high-value goods like machinery and aerospace components because of these layered tariffs. It gets complicated.
So the overall employment picture in the U.S. sounds mixed. A projected net loss overall, concentrated in rural areas like agriculture and construction, but maybe some wage growth in strategic manufacturing. That paints a pretty uneven picture domestically.
It does. A net change projected around negative 641,000 jobs overall for the U.S., but potential wage growth of 0.6% in manufacturing. Uneven is a good word.
Does this unevenness extend to Europe too? Are certain EU countries feeling the brunt of this deal more than others?
Absolutely. The impact isn't uniform across Europe at all. Ireland and Germany show the highest relative exposure to U.S. tariffs,
Relative exposure
meaning a large percentage of their exports to U.S. compared to their total exports outside the EU. For Ireland, it's over 53%. For Germany, around 23%. But Germany has the highest absolute export volume at risk, over $160 billion worth of goods potentially affected. Italy is another highly exposed country, particularly in areas like transport equipment, fashion, car manufacturing. So yeah, it's a very targeted economic impact in many ways.
Beyond the direct economic numbers, this deal seems to signal some profound strategic shifts in global trade. What are some of those, maybe unforeseen dynamics already playing out?
Well, one key shift is what some analysts are calling institutional drift. This deal signals a clear sidestepping of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. Trade norms are increasingly being rewritten via these kinds of executive agreements, not through the established multilateral process.
Which raises questions
About the legality of tariff authority, for one. And broadly, it undermines multilateralism, the whole idea that countries work together through international organizations like the WTO.
So less reliance on established global trade bodies and more on powerful bilateral deals. Is that the trend?
It seems to be pushing in that direction, yes. This also influences a kind of recalibration of alliances. The EU is already looking to diversify away from Russian energy sources, for example, but now they're also grappling with the implications of U.S. leverage in these new agreements. And a predicted secondary effect, which we might be starting to see, is the reshoring of supply chains companies trying to encourage more local sourcing and production to reduce these kinds of dependencies.
You've highlighted a fascinating and potentially troubling dynamic emerging from this, what's been termed the second China shock. Can you break down what that is and why it's a critical ripple effect?
Yeah, it's a significant concern, especially for Europe. The basic idea is that higher U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods could effectively divert those Chinese exports elsewhere.
Divert them where?
Towards the European market.
Wow.
Think steel, electronics, machinery, batteries, smartphones, stuff that might have gone to the U.S. now looks for another buyer. And recent trade data from May 2025 suggests this may already be happening.
Really? What does the data show?
It showed Chinese exports to the EU surging up 12% year on year. But at the same time, their exports to the U.S. plummeted by over 34%.
Oh, a huge swing.
Exactly. And this led to a 22% increase in the EU's trade deficit with China in just 1 month. So Europe seems to be seeing an influx of goods that might have otherwise been destined for the U.S. market.
That's a massive ripple effect. And what about currency markets? This is really interesting. Why is the dollar, usually seen as the ultimate safe haven currency, actually weakening now?
Yeah.
That seems contrary to what trade theory often predicts.
It is a fascinating twist, isn't it? Normally, in times of global economic stress or uncertainty, money floods into the dollar because it's considered safe, the flight to safety. But here, the source of some of that stress is U.S. trade policy itself, which creates its own kind of uncertainty. And there are deeper concerns bubbling up about America's rising national debt and government spending, what economists call fiscal sustainability. That's also making investors maybe a bit hesitant, even about the dollar.
So the dollar's traditional role is being questioned.
To some extent, yes. The euro, for instance, appreciated nearly 14% year-to-date through June 2025 against the dollar. And some forecasts even suggest a potential 25–30% dollar depreciation longer term.
That's truly counterintuitive. And for financial markets beyond currency, what's the volatility picture look like? Are markets getting choppy?
Yes, tariff announcements have definitely led to significant volatility in European equity markets, particularly hitting those export-oriented sectors we talked about. Now, euro area government bond yields have remained largely stable so far. But there are concerns about potential contagion effects if U.S. bond yields rise significantly due to those fiscal pressures we mentioned. That could spill over, especially for EU member states that are less fiscally strong.
And banks. Are they worried?
The banking sector appears relatively resilient for now, but they're definitely facing uncertainty regarding the credit quality of borrowers. Think about companies highly exposed to tariffs in sectors like automotive, metals, pharmaceuticals, chemicals. Banks are watching those closely. Now, what's fascinating here is how all of this plays out for central banks, particularly the European Central Bank, the ECB.
Right. The ECB has been cutting rates, hasn't it?
Yeah.
How does that decision tie into this new trade landscape?
Exactly. The ECB cut its key deposit facility rate to 2.0% back in June 2025. That was its seventh consecutive cut. And in their reasoning, they explicitly acknowledged trade policy uncertainty as a key factor influencing their decision.
So they're directly responding to this deal.
They have to. The ECB faces this really complex challenge. Tariffs can create short-term inflationary pressures because import prices go up. But at the same time, they can suppress economic growth and lower inflation over the longer term by reducing trade volumes.
So higher prices short term, slower growth long term. That sounds creepy.
It is. It creates what's called stagflationary pressure, that difficult environment where growth slows down but prices keep rising. It's a tough tightrope for any central bank to walk.
How has ECB President Christine Lagarde characterized this moment for Europe? What's her take?
Well, commenting on the U.S. tariffs, Christine Lagarde had a very pointed quote. She said, "He calls it Liberation Day in the United States. I see it as a moment when we must together decide to take better control of our destiny, and I think it's a step towards independence."
A step towards independence. That's strong language.
It is, and it reflects a broader strategic aim within the EU to enhance the euro's international standing and, frankly, reduce dependency on the U.S. dollar and U.S. systems.
And what does that mean in practical terms? How do they boost the euro's role?
Well, it includes exploring ways to expand the availability of safe and liquid euro-denominated assets, maybe through common EU debt issuance, which has always been a tricky subject. Also, integrating European capital markets more deeply. And they're even investigating the use of a digital euro for wholesale transactions
A digital euro. Why?
as a potential means to reduce reliance on U.S. payment schemes and ultimately strengthen European sovereignty in the global financial system. It's all part of that bigger strategic push Lagarde mentioned.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Wrapping this up, this deep dive reveals that the 2025 U.S. EU trade deal is far more than just a simple tariff agreement, isn't it?
Far more.
It's a dynamic, evolving framework. It's viewed drastically differently across the Atlantic. It has tangible economic impacts we're already seeing and profound strategic implications, everything from institutional shifts away from the WTO to these really unexpected currency dynamics. It's truly a complex web. So here's something to think about. In a world where trade policy is increasingly used as a tool for geopolitical leverage, how will this ongoing tension, the tension between national economic interests on one hand and the principles of global cooperation on the other, continue to redefine international alliances and really shape the very future of global trade? Something to mull over long after this deep dive ends.